Russia's war machine is running out of fuel. Putin's oil empire, the backbone of his economy and his weapons, is collapsing. In just 2 months, systematic Ukrainian attacks have destroyed half of Russia's refining capacity, according to data from October 21st. With sanctions blocking repairs and chaos spreading inside the country, Russia faces something unprecedented. A war no longer decided on the battlefield, but in the refineries, now burning in flames. How did Ukraine manage to strike the very heart of Russia's energy power and turn oil, once its greatest strength, into its greatest weakness? When the invasion began in February 2022, the Kremlin believed the conflict would be over in a matter of weeks, and that the fighting would never cross its borders. Russia saw its own territory as a fortress, protected by geographic depth, layered air defenses, and an untouchable industrial network that would feed its troops indefinitely. At that moment, Ukraine had no means to challenge that logic. Its drones were improvised, its missiles limited to just a few kilometers of range. Moscow counted on that, and for months, it was right. Russian refineries, railways, and fuel depots operated in peace, while Ukrainian cities burned under caliber missile strikes and strategic bombers. But that advantage began to crumble with the arrival of Western weapons. First came the HIMARS, then the Storm Shadow and Scalp EG systems, weapons designed to hit targets with surgical precision hundreds of kilometers away. Even then, there was a political barrier. Allies forbade their use inside Russia. Kiev could strike targets in Crimea or occupied territories, but not the energy sources that kept Russia's war machine running. That restriction lasted just long enough to give Moscow a false sense of security, a confidence that would soon turn into a fatal mistake. While the world saw Ukraine merely holding on, inside discrete workshops, engineers and military specialists were building something that would completely change the course of the war, the birth of the long-range monster. In a few months, what had once been improvised became science. Civilian drones were converted into precision weapons. Small factories began producing engines, navigation systems, and warheads designed to hit targets hundreds of kilometers away. And for the first time, Russia started to feel what it is to live under constant threat. The first attacks came as early as 2024. They were sporadic, 1 or 2 drones crossing the border to strike isolated depots and refineries in southern Russia. To Moscow, they looked like insignificant incidents. In practice, however, they were tests. Every explosion produced data: flight time, radar reactions, the pattern of defenses. Ukraine watched, learned, and improved. Those early strikes were precise enough to cause fires and short interruptions, but not long-lasting. Russian teams were able to repair the damage, resume refining, and keep operating. But that changed fast. Starting in August of 2025, Kiev stopped aiming only for immediate impact and began aiming for prolonged collapse. A new tactic emerged: strike the same target repeatedly until the opponent's ability to respond was exhausted. Entire refineries were hit 2, 3, 4 times in succession. It did not matter if a fire had been put out. Minutes later, another swarm of drones returned. The goal was not to destroy everything at once, but to prevent repairs, keep the systems offline, force Russia to spend resources, and turn every repair into a loss larger than the previous attack. In just 2 months, that tactic changed everything. More than a dozen refineries, responsible for nearly half of Russia's fuel, were hit continuously. The country began to feel what it had never imagined: diesel shortages, logistical delays, and military convoys stranded for lack of fuel. The long-range monster was not just a weapon, it was a strategy. A calculated blow that turned what had once been untouchable territory into Ukraine's new battlefield. The turning point came at the end of October 2025. A report from Euromaidan Press, based on Western intelligence sources and satellite imagery, confirmed the unthinkable. Half of Russia's refining capacity was out of operation, 50%, a number that for any energy superpower means collapse. The marks of disaster spread across the entire map. Kshtovo, Ryazan, Tuapse, Syzran, Omsk, Novoshakhtinsk, and Kirishi. Each of these cities hosts damaged refineries, all with smoke plumes visible for dozens of miles. The affected areas cover virtually all of Russia's European territory, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The scale is so vast that no defense system can protect everything. The refineries were attacked by swarms of drones, cruise missiles, and guided munitions, a pattern resembling high-precision surgeries executed in sequence to ensure the damage was irreversible. But the true collapse did not come from the explosions alone. It came from what happened afterward. Western sanctions, which once seemed like symbolic pressure, turned into a deadly barrier. Russia simply can no longer import the parts needed to repair its refining units. Industrial valves, pressure sensors, compressors, turbines. All of it was made in Germany, South Korea, France, and Japan. Today, those suppliers are far beyond Moscow's reach. Without new parts, Russian companies began cannibalizing their own refineries, stripping equipment from one plant to try to reactivate another. It's a nationwide patchwork. Every repair means the sacrifice of a different facility. It's like trying to fix a plane mid-flight, tearing off the wings to replace the engine. This practice has rapidly degraded the infrastructure. Stations that return to operation do so at partial capacity, with reduced efficiency and constant risk of accidents. Experts estimate that many of these refineries will not return to full operation for at least 5 years. The financial impact is devastating. Before the war, oil and its derivatives accounted for almost 40% of Russia's federal budget. In 2021 alone, exports brought in over $240 billion. But since Ukraine's campaign began striking refineries in succession, that revenue has collapsed. By September 2025, total exports had fallen below $110 billion, more than a 50% drop in direct export income. Daily diesel production, essential for tanks, transport, and agriculture, was nearly cut in half. Russia has been forced to redirect crude oil for export instead of refining it, an emergency measure that lowers value and disrupts the entire domestic supply chain. Inside the country, chaos is visible. In several regions, fuel prices have doubled. Military convoys have stalled for lack of diesel. Civil companies have cut grain and supply transport. Strategic reserves are being consumed just to keep minimal operations running, a resource that, according to analysts, could run out within months if the attacks continue. The irony is cruel. Oil, the symbol of Russian power for decades, has become its greatest vulnerability. Ukraine discovered where the war truly hurts, not in the trenches, but in the flames now consuming Putin's refineries. And as smoke rises over the Russian horizon, a new phase of this war begins, one that no longer depends solely on soldiers, but on technology, precision, and intelligence. In just a few weeks, the fuel crisis stopped being a theoretical risk and became part of everyday life across dozens of regions. Gas stations began imposing fuel limits, 10, sometimes only 20 liters per person. Lines form before dawn, and the truck drivers report waiting for hours just to get enough fuel to work. In some rural areas, especially in the regions of Kursk, Tambov, and Bryansk, diesel has simply disappeared. Russia, once proud to call itself an energy superpower, is now facing internal fuel rationing, an irony few Russians can explain. The impact spread quickly. Public transportation reduced its frequency, harvests were delayed, and small industries dependent on generators were forced to shut down. The country has discovered that it can have plenty of oil, but without refineries, that oil moves nothing. And the political fallout did not take long. Inside the Kremlin, pressure on Putin is mounting. Regional governors are warning of logistical collapse. Mayors are struggling to contain protests in mid-sized cities. And discontent is spreading across social media, where videos of long gas lines circulate despite censorship. The narrative of a distant war has crumbled. Now every Russian feels the weight of the conflict directly in their wallet and in their gas tank. The blind faith in the invulnerability of the Russian state is starting to crack, and the sense of stability that once sustained the regime is beginning to erode. Moscow's response was predictable: retaliation. In recent weeks, Russia has intensified its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, power plants, substations, electrical grids. But this offensive, while increasing civilian suffering, does nothing to solve its internal crisis. No matter how much energy it destroys in Ukraine, the Kremlin cannot manufacture the parts it needs, nor rebuild the refineries it has lost. The energy war has become a cruel mirror. The more Russia tries to punish, the more it exposes its own weaknesses. The war in Ukraine has entered a new era, one where missiles and drones have replaced tank battles, and the economy has become the main battlefield. Kiev's strategy is clear: to suffocate Russia not just at the front, but at its industrial and energy core. Every refinery destroyed, every fuel train halted, every night the Russian sky lights up in flames is part of a calculated war of attrition. a war not seeking a quick victory, but an inevitable one. Volodymyr Zelensky has already made that clear. In his latest address, he stated that Ukraine is expanding the range and precision of its strikes. A simple phrase, but one with enormous weight. It means the economic siege on Russia is only beginning, and that now, no target essential to Moscow's war effort is truly out of reach. But this is also a race against time. On one side, Russia struggles to survive the financial and industrial collapse caused by strikes and sanctions. On the other, Ukraine faces the exhaustion of its own resources and the constant destruction of its energy infrastructure. The question is no longer who advances faster on the battlefield, but who can stand longer. Even so, something has changed irreversibly. For the first time since the invasion began, Moscow is tasting its own fear. The fear that the war, which started with tanks crossing borders, might end with drones crossing the skies above its cities. Ukraine has found the empire's weak spot. The heart that once pumped oil and power now bleeds fire. And perhaps, in the end, the fate of this war will not be decided by armies, but by a nation's ability to sustain its own future. While Russian refineries keep burning, another silent front may soon seal the fate of Putin's oil, this time at sea. Denmark has just made a decision that could block Russia's shadow fleet, the very ships keeping the Kremlin's war economy alive. If you want to understand how this move in the Baltic could change the entire energy game for Russia, click the card appearing on the screen now and continue this story with me.